What to watch for post All-Star break? What's worked recently for the Wolves, especially in offense, and what on the defensive end needs to be shored up if the Wolves are going to manage a top 4 seed in the West next?
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, now the #1 sports podcast network. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Use your profit boost on an NBA future and get entered for your chance to win a trip to the NBA Finals. Play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Happy Tuesday, everybody. I'm Ben Beecken, the host of the Daily Locked On Wolves show. And today on the show, I want to talk a little bit of, it's kind of a hybrid, what worked, what wasn't working at the end of the first half. I call it first half. It's really the first 2/3 of the NBA schedule, the pre-All-Star break schedule. And then peeking ahead, what does that mean for the post-All-Star break schedule? What do we need more of? What do we need less of if you want the Timberwolves to keep winning basketball games and finish, currently they're 6th in the West. They're within a game or so of 4th and really only, I think, like 2 games back of the 3 spot. So it's all still on the table. And I said this on yesterday's show, preseason, one of my bold predictions is the Wolves would finish 3rd in the West. That's not out of the question. They're 2 games behind Denver. So, if that's going to happen, what needs to keep happening or to stop or happen less for the Wolves here moving forward? And later in the week, I will get into actual, bold predictions, midseason bold predictions, but then also looking at the schedule, going blow by blow, hey, wins and losses as what we know about this team. A little different than before the season because this year's Timberwolves team every year is different, obviously, even though, 6 of the top rotation guys or 7 really for most of the year were the same. We have a much better sense for how this year's version of the Timberwolves behaves against good teams and bad teams. So what does that mean for the close to the season? We'll talk about that later in the week. But today, some specifics about what's worked and what hasn't to this point, what to look out for coming out of the break later this week. A big thank you off the top for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Wherever you like to listen to podcasts, you can find Locked On Wolves. All right. So I talked a little bit late last week, leading into the All-Star break, about Timberwolves and wins versus losses, and that's relevant to this conversation. So very quickly, if you missed Friday's show, obviously, great. Go back and or not great. Please don't miss the show, but go back and watch, listen to it now. I talked a lot about in wins, the Timberwolves, or I should say in losses, the Timberwolves turn the ball over a lot more on offense, and on defense, they give up a lot of free throws. And one of my, so oftentimes you'll watch a game on TV and they'll be like, in wins, the Wolves are 24-2 and they shoot 40%. I don't know if this is true, but some crazy stat. It's well, obviously in wins, they're going to do this better and they're going to win when they do whatever that is at a higher level. Right. But for the Wolves, the offense is good even in losses, except for turnovers. They shoot the ball well in losses. They shoot the ball well in wins. The assist rate is pretty good in losses. The offensive rebounding is decent across the board. But turnovers are the one kind of bellwether. If they turn the ball over a bunch, they lose. And that's true of a lot of teams, but they're good in a lot of other areas, even when they lose. Defensively, it's maybe less smooth, but free throw rate is a key indicator. Now, the other thing we talked about is how the Wolves have been very mediocre against the middle third of the league in terms of point differential and actually pretty good overall against the bottom 10, 15-3 against the bottom 10, which is good. And 8-8 against the top 10, which is fine. The 8-9 against the middle 10 is the bigger issue. But overall, I want to point this out to kind of set the stage for today, is the Timberwolves are still top 6 in both offense and defense. I say still, they dipped below that, I think, in both areas here recently. But they're one of only 3 teams in the entire NBA that's top 6 in offense and top 6 in defense on cleaning the glass. Obviously, OKC is one of the other ones. I'd give you 4 guesses to guess the other 2, and I don't know that, you would assume maybe Detroit, maybe San Antonio. No, not Boston, not Detroit, not San Antonio, not the Knicks. It's Houston. Oh, so I guess that's only one other team. Minnesota, Houston, and OKC are the only 3 teams that are top 6 in both areas. Minnesota's 5th in offense and 6th in defense. Houston is 6th in offense and 4th in defense. OKC's 4th in offense and 1st in defense, obviously. So that goes to show just how good the full body of work has been to this point for the Timberwolves. And that's relevant to this whole conversation. One of the things that has been great for Minnesota since January 1st, and to be clear, like, I'm not at all suggesting the Wolves have been great since January 1st, because as has been the case all season for this Timberwolves team, this version of the Timberwolves it's been a roller coaster. And I'm choosing January 1st because it's clean, it's arbitrary, I get it, but it's a clean, point of delineation. And also, by the way, they started a 4-game winning streak on January 3rd, right? So they start the new year by winning 6 of 7, then they lose 5 in a row, then they win 4 in a row, then they lose 3 out of 4, then they win the last 2 before the All-Star break. But overall, since January 1st, which I guess one more, like, not qualifier, but one more note here, Minnesota on January 1st was 21-13. So since then, they've gone 13-9, which is very, like, whatever. Like, it's not horrible, but obviously there was higher expectations. Although January schedule was really hard, right? Like, the double Cleveland games, 2 San Antonio games, 2 Golden State games, an OKC, Houston in there for the first time this season. Like, it wasn't easy by any stretch. But the point is, they've been 13-9 since January 1st, but the offense has been the best in the league. It's been the number 1 offense in the NBA since January 1st. And the pace at which they're playing is also extremely fast. They are 7th in terms of frequency of transition since January 1st. And that's a stat on cleaning the glass. It's not quite the same as pace. But it's essentially, like, the way they would define it is the frequency of possessions, of offensive possessions that started in transition. And they're 7th in the NBA, nearly 17%. And again, number 1 in offense. And they're top 10 in every category when you look at transition for their offense over at cleaning the glass. So they're 7th in frequency. They're 3rd in points plus per 100 possessions, which is how many points per 100 possessions did the team add through transition. 3rd overall. They're 5th in running frequency off of steals, and they're 10th in running off of rebounds, which is huge for them. Like, go back the last 2-3 years. I think there's a pre-Gobert Chris Finch Timberwolves and a post-Gobert Chris Finch Timberwolves. So just go with the Gobert teams. They don't run off of rebounds at all, but they do run off of steals at a relatively high margin. And now they're top 5 in running off of steals since January 1st, and they're number 10 in running off of live offensive rebounds, or off of live defensive rebounds. They're 4th in points added per 100 possessions off of rebounds, and 7th off of steals. So they're running more, they're running more effectively, and that's led to I think it's the biggest factor in the number 1 offense since January 1st. Now, their effective field goal percentage is also best in the league. That matters too. But that's also supported by how often you're running in transition. Because what does transition give you? Open layups, open dunks, and open 3-pointers, right? You guys sprinting to the corner, trail threes, whatever the case might be. And then obviously, your free throws aren't necessarily impacting that, but if that impacts your bottom line as an offense, and you're getting more free throw opportunities in transition as well. And Ayo Dosunmu has only played in 3 games in a Timberwolves uniform. So it's not because of Ayo Dosunmu, but I do want to talk more about Ayo here in just a minute. And his presence is only going to continue to boost the frequency of running in transition for Minnesota. I think that's part of the same conversation. And I guess to put a fine point on the end of this portion of the discussion is pre-January 1st, Minnesota was 20th in frequency in transition. They're 7th now. They're 20th, they're 7th post-January 1st. Pre-January 1st, 20th in the NBA in frequency of transition opportunities, according to Cleaning the Glass. That's a significant difference. And remember, last year at this time, the thing we were talking about was offensive rebounding. There was a switch that flipped in January last year where Minnesota committed to offensive rebounding more frequently. They're not quite doing it at the same level they were in the second half of the season last year, but they're still rebounding at a much higher level on the offensive glass than any time prior to prior to 13 months ago. Go back pre-January of 2025, and Chris Finch's teams did not focus on the offensive glass. That's a clear strategic shift they made last year that has, for the most part, carried over to the season, even if it's not quite at that level. Last year was offensive rebounding. This year, it's pace, it's transition opportunities, it's easy buckets in transition. And on Basketball Reference, Minnesota's 10th in pace. And I will remind you, I mentioned this on yesterday's show, I think. One of my bold predictions before the season was that Minnesota would finish the year top 10 in the league in pace. And at least according to Basketball Reference, they're 10th in pace. I think it was a clear focus for Chris Finch. I think Terrence Shannon Jr. was a big part of that plan, and to a lesser extent, Rob Dillingham. Obviously, neither of those guys have played a significant role this year, and Dillingham's gone, and TJ Shannon's still out, although he's supposed to come back shortly after the break. But Ayo Dosunmu, who we'll talk about here in a minute, has filled, at least over the last 3 games, and surely moving forward, the idea is that he fills the role that TJ Shannon was supposed to play for this year's Wolves team. So we'll get into that here next. We'll talk about Dosunmu's role and what to look out for on that front here moving forward next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our friends at Indeed. Workplace chaos, deadlines stacking up, inbox overflowing, and the one position you have to fill still sitting open. When the pressure's on and you need the right hire, this is a job for sponsored jobs. Indeed, sponsored jobs helps you reach the people who actually fit what you're looking for. Skills, experience, locations, so you're not just hoping the right candidate stumbles across your post. And here's a stat that says it all. In the minute that I'm talking to you about Indeed, companies like yours made 27 hires on Indeed, according to Indeed data worldwide. So if you're hiring, spend less time searching and more time interviewing candidates who check all your boxes with Indeed sponsored jobs. Spend less time searching and, again, more time actually interviewing those candidates who check those boxes. Less stress, less time, more results. When you need the right person to cut through the chaos, this is a job for Indeed sponsored jobs. Listeners of this show will get $75 sponsored job credit to help get your job the premium status it deserves at Indeed.com/podcast. Go to Indeed.com/podcast right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? This is a job for Indeed sponsored jobs. Today's episode is also brought to us by our friends at TurboTax. Tax season doesn't have to take over your life. This year, TurboTax is making it easier than ever to just hand things off and move on with your day. With TurboTax full service, you can have your taxes done for you by a trusted local expert, start to finish, without the guess or stress work. Instead of spending hours trying to figure out forms, you can meet with a local TurboTax expert in person or connect online. They handle everything from W-2s to self-employed forms and work to get you every deduction. You can upload your documents, go about your day, and get updates right in the TurboTax app. It's a huge time saver and gives real peace of mind knowing that an expert is handling it. For a limited time, you can have your taxes done by a local TurboTax expert for just $150 all in. If a TurboTax expert did not file for you last year, just file by February 28th. So just about a week and a half from now. Take taxes off your plate and get back to your life. Visit TurboTax.com/local to book your appointment today. Reminder, you can get Locked On Wolves ad-free with the Everydayer Club, plus members-only Discord access. Been active in there in the channel, so come in and chat with us about the Wolves, the upcoming schedule, what you're expecting in the second half of the season. You can join the Everydayer Club at LockedOnWolves.supercast.com. Again, access to the Discord channel as well as ad-free episodes of Locked On Wolves. Okay, so we talked about transition overall, the transition offense. I want to talk about Ayo Dosunmu specifically. And we'll talk about his lineups, although obviously the data points are very short. We're talking 3 games. And frankly, like the Ayo on-court, on-off stuff isn't great because, again, we're talking 3 games. And the first game he played with the Timberwolves was, of course, the disastrous matinee that Sunday against the Clippers. That was just a horrific performance by the Wolves. So that's going to skew everything. So don't get too locked in, and I'm not going to get too locked in on the specific on-off as of right now. I mean, he hasn't even, he's played, 83 minutes in a Timberwolves uniform. But I want to talk about what to look for in terms of lineup combinations and what I think Chris Finch might have in mind. Back to what I said a minute ago at the end of the first segment. Clearly, the Timberwolves had a plan to use TJ Shannon in a very similar role as Ayo Dosunmu. There's a lot, talked about this a little bit last week, about Ayo that is similar to Terrence Shannon Jr., at least the fully realized version of Terrence Shannon Jr., who, of course, is just in his second year in the league. I know he's 25, but in terms of an experience level, what he's supposed to do is push the pace, be a good volume three-point shooter, be a big-body defender, be athletic, and just get to the rim. Be a terror in transition is the phrase I've used to describe TJ Shannon since they drafted him about a year and a half ago. And we saw that in flashes last year. Remember that start he had against the Lakers, a couple of other instances late in the season last year, around this time, actually last season. Certainly the blip in the playoffs against the Thunder when he got an opportunity. And a couple times early this season prior to the injury, we saw it. Actually, one of those was against the Thunder as well in, I think, November. Shannon's, was up and down early in the season, got hurt, came back, wasn't as good, got hurt again or re-injured himself, and now he's been out. But all of that stuff that I just mentioned is exactly what Ayo Dosunmu is supposed to do. And Ayo's a better shooter, at least in what we've seen Shannon do. And between college and the NBA, very likely Dosunmu's a better shooter, at least certainly what he's done this season than what Shannon's done. I think he's a better ball handler. He can actually masquerade as a point guard, and I don't think TJ can actually do that. Although last summer, headed into Las Vegas Summer League, I spent a lot of time on this show talking about how the Wolves clearly would like to see TJ Shannon run some offense so they know he can be add him to the list of guys that can initiate offense in the absence of a true point guard, right? And Dante's on that list, and Dosunmu's on that list, and Julius Randle's on that list, and Jaden McDaniels has found himself on that list. This is all in addition to Anthony Edwards and anything, obviously they got from Mike Conley, and we'll probably get from Mike Conley again when he inevitably returns. But Dosunmu's better in that role. And obviously the NBA experience helps. He's a better ball handler overall than TJ Shannon. He's a better shooter. And I would argue he's a better defender. He's not as big as Shannon, and that matters. They're probably similar athletes. TJ might be a little bit of a better, athlete. I think it's close, but Dosunmu is a better version, a fully realized version, of TJ Shannon. So I think now there's some possibility that, there is a possibility those guys play together, at some point here moving forward, if Shannon is indeed, going to come back from injury, and he's supposed to. He was practicing with the Iowa Wolves. Like, he may come back and play, and they may get to play together a little bit. I think that would be fascinating. To this point, the Dosunmu numbers, again, are very limited, but the lineups that have worked the best with him in a very small sample across 3 games, caveats apply, have been with Donte DiVincenzo. And across 69 possessions with Dosunmu and DiVincenzo on the court together, Minnesota's a plus 7.6, according to Cleaning the Glass. The defense hasn't been great, but the offense has been awesome. 99th percentile. 3 of those 4 lineups, all 4, the top 4 lineups in terms of frequency, and the top 3 that have actually played at least 10 possessions together and are positive, all include Julius Randle. So the most used one is Dosunmu and DiVincenzo, along with Anthony Edwards, Jaden McDaniels, and Julius Randle. So it's the starting lineup minus Gobert plus Dosunmu. So a small lineup with Randle at the 5, which is fascinating. And of course, matchups play into that. And this last week was a weird week in terms of matchups and guys who are available and not available for their opponents. The next most used lineup is that same lineup, but without McDaniels and with Gobert. So a little bit of a bigger lineup with Randle at the 4, Gobert at the 5, but DiVincenzo, Dosunmu, and Edwards all on the floor together. The next best lineup and the next most used lineup is that same lineup, but take out Ant and put back in Jaden McDaniels. So all these permutations, the constants are, of course, Dosunmu, DiVincenzo, and Julius Randle. And all 3 of those lineups together have been really good. And I think we're going to see a lot of that, because you're talking about 3 guys who are all good passers, who all see the floor well, and all want to push the pace. Those guys all want to do that. And they're all willing 3-point shooters. Julius is the worst 3-point shooter in the Wolves rotation this side of Jalen Clark, but and obviously not counting Rudy Gobert. But Julius is going to let it fly from 3, and there's that element to his game. And again, pushing the pace, I think, matters the most. And then you end up with Dosunmu and DiVincenzo trailing the play and being open for 3s. Like, that's a real thing that we're going to see a lot of. And you want to talk about pushing the pace, that's what Dosunmu does best. He's going to be that guy. And we saw this, like, he'll do just a 2-on-1 break, 2 offense, 1 defense. He'll go with a 1-on-2 break himself. And because he's so fast and can get around guys quickly in the open floor, like, he's got pretty good bursts in the half court, but like, it's not like he's Ant with his first step in the half court. It's when a defender's backpedaling, he's got this turbo button. It's like legit hitting a turbo button in like 2K or something and just getting his head and shoulders past somebody. And the percentage at the rim, we talked about this the other day, hasn't been very good this year for Dosunmu, but I think that's more fluky than anything else. We saw him, I think, miss his first layup the other night for the Wolves, and then he made like every other 2-pointer he shot the rest of the game. He's got really good feel around the rim and is able to absorb contact very well. And I think ultimately that number will level out. It may actually benefit the Wolves if we see a progression to the mean there when it comes to Dosunmu, his shooting at the rim. But Ayo as a whole is going to be huge to pushing the pace for Minnesota. And the more you play Dosunmu and Edwards and DiVincenzo together, the faster you're going to play. And I think it's pretty, like, they're going to do that regardless of whether or not Rudy Gobert's on the floor. I honestly don't think it matters that much. And I know I had advocated 2 seasons ago, I was a big proponent of, hey, the Wolves need to just play really fast when Gobert's off the floor and Cat's at the 5, because you're not going to be able to play defense anywhere near the level of what you can do with Gobert on the floor. That's still true. But I wanted the Wolves to push the pace more. I don't care whether or not Gobert's on the floor right now. He's actually ran the floor pretty well and had pretty good hands this year, and all that stuff's been okay. But you're going to score so fast, it's not going to matter if you've got Dosunmu and Edwards. And obviously, Edwards actually likes to slow the pace, and a lot of times they play slower when he's on the floor. But with Dosunmu and DiVincenzo, that's not going to matter either. Those guys are going to force the issue. And more often than not, that's a good thing for the Timberwolves. All right. Couple more quick things. I'll lay out what we're doing here the rest of the week, and that's how we'll close the show here today. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our title sponsors at FanDuel. Ever wanted to experience the NBA Finals live and in person? FanDuel is giving you the chance to turn that dream into reality with their NBA sweepstakes. Here's how it works. Use your profit boost on any NBA future, and you'll automatically be entered for a shot to win an NBA Finals trip for 2. That's right. Flights, tickets, the whole experience. If you're already looking at the board and thinking about which team can make a deep run, this is the perfect time to lock it in post All-Star break. Like, just do it. Pick who you think is going to win the championship, or maybe it's win the conference title in the West. If you win the conference, you probably might as well just pick them to win the title against whomever. Probably Detroit comes out of the East. It adds that extra layer of excitement to every game down the stretch. And now not only can you pick cash, but it could also send you to the finals. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Use your profit boost on an NBA future and get entered for your chance to win a trip to the NBA Finals. Play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right. Let's close here today by hitting one other thing here to keep an eye out for as we move into the final, I don't know, what is this, 2 months of the season? Actually, less than 2 months of the season. We talked about pace. We talked a little bit about Dosunmu and the Dosunmu lineups. The other thing I want to note is on the defensive side of the ball for Minnesota, something I touched on a little bit on Friday is in the losses, the Timberwolves do a horrible job at defending without fouling. I think that's something else to keep an eye on. And this is a broader context. This isn't as much a database thing. I mean, it is based on the Wolves' defensive free throw rate, but go back 12 months. And actually, what was it, 2 years ago, where there was this big emphasis on like, hey, you can be more physical now defensively. And it benefited Minnesota as they got into the playoffs and they were physical with Phoenix. Towns guarding Durant, very physical. It worked out great. The physicality Minnesota was able to use against Jamal Murray just made his life a living hell in round 2 years ago. And also with Jokic, honestly, that was Cat 2 guarding Nikola Jokic in the second round of the playoffs 2 years ago. The physicality that was allowed benefited Minnesota. Last year, it was less drastic, but I do feel like more was allowed as the year wore on. This year's Timberwolves team, they could benefit from that as well. And here's what I mean by that. So something I dug in on a couple of weeks ago was, I don't think Minnesota, nobody's saying the Wolves are anywhere near as good as what they were 2 years ago defensively. Obviously, not having Nickeil Alexander-Walker matters. Clearly, that year, I'm sure they wouldn't admit this, but they had something to prove. They had never won a round in the playoffs. They took that it mattered, right? Now they've been to the conference finals twice, and I know it's not the same as the finals, but there's clearly a too cool for school element at times to this Wolves team. It's why they lose to bad teams occasionally. And also why the last 2 seasons they've gotten off to a slower start and lock in as the year wears on. And hopefully we see that again post All-Star break. But I do think that on the defensive end of the floor, they're not as physical in a good way as they were 2 years ago, but occasionally they're physical in a bad way. And this is a weird thing. And I'm like talking in a circle here. But what I mean by that is some games they just don't try defensively and they just get worked. And the offense is still good, but the defense is horrible and they lose. Like, I mean, I don't know. I'm not looking at the schedule right now, but there's plenty. Actually, I have it right in front of me. There's plenty of examples of that, right? The Memphis game 2 weeks ago, they got beat 137 to 128. Obviously the losses that they had to New Orleans and LA, where they gave up over 115 points to bad, LA's fine, but a hardenless LA team, a bad Pelicans team, like not great. The win against Toronto, 128 to 126. Like, what are we doing? Why are they giving up so many points? Those are the games when they just don't care. There's some games where they care a little bit, but they don't care enough to actually move their feet, so they get grabby. And it's not a good physical. It's not a, hey, I'm going to hand check you. I'm going to do the Nikhil. I'm going to press up on you on the timeline. I'm going to fight through the screen and maybe draw an offensive foul and make the officials blow a whistle on me for fighting through the screen, which they often won't do in that, like the stuff that Alexander Walker perfected and the stuff they did to Jamal Murray in the playoffs a couple years ago. Like, they're not to that level. But Ant and Jaden and DiVincenzo and Randle to an extent will get physical and they'll get a little bit handsy because they're not fully moving their feet and sliding their feet and getting in front and staying in front. And they're just giving the official reason to blow their whistle. And that has hurt Minnesota. And if they can just cut back on that piece, remain physical, but actually, like, I think there's two things here. One, could they return to that form that they showed at times late last season and a lot more frequently 2 years ago, where they actually are locking in every game or virtually every game instead of just in the games against the best opponents? And then secondly, if the officiating is going to allow more fouls to be called as the season wears on, could that benefit Minnesota, who is a big physical team, even if the technique isn't great, even if you don't have Nickeil Alexander-Walker and instead you've got a smaller defender in Ayo Dosunmu or a more tired Anthony Edwards, an exhausted Anthony Edwards, or Julius Randle, who can be really good defensively when he really chooses to lock in. Can they, and Rudy Gobert, who, by the way, every flagrant foul from here on out, he gets suspended a game. Like, that's something to keep an eye on too. But related to that, like, this Minnesota team can be physical and can be sloppily physical as well, which is not helpful. But in their losses, that free throw rate is out of control. In wins, it's still not great, but it's at least palatable. And overall for the season, they're 19th in defensive free throw rate. Is that something that can level out a little bit here in the unofficial second half of the season? And can Minnesota take advantage of any additional allowance for physicality that the officials give in, March and April and into May? I think they'll have the personnel to do it. I mean, Dosunmu is a fairly physical defender. Jalen Clark is on the fringes of the rotation. TJ Shannon, I think he needs to be more physical as a defender. I don't think his technique's very good, and obviously he's going to be coming off an injury. But you look at the top 10, 11 guys, they could use a little bit more leeway there when it comes to that on the defensive end of the floor. And on the flip side, the offense, they've done a pretty good job of getting to the line. Now, it's mostly Anthony Edwards and a lot of Rudy Gobert getting to the line and missing free throws. But, Rudy's a shade over 50% for the season at the line, and he's shooting more than 4 free throws a game because teams have finally been like, all right, we'll take our chances here with Rudy at the free throw line, which, by the way, that's actually something I could have done a whole thing on that today, and maybe I'll touch on it later this week. But as a team, Minnesota, the free throw shooting has been miserable, and that obviously matters more. It's magnified in close games and late in the season and into the playoffs. Rudy has only shot below 60% on free throws once in his entire career, and it was year 3. Back in 2015-16. Every other year, he's been 62% or better, and most years, he's in the 64, 65, 66% range. He is 50% this year. 50%. Keep an eye on that. And the Wolves more broadly as a team, more holistically as free throw shooters. What's that look like here as we get down the stretch in the regular season? So all that stuff, keep an eye on. Later in the week, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about bold predictions. We're going to talk about schedule predictions. We'll do that the next couple of days here. And then we'll get into on Friday, we'll preview the Wolves-Mavs game. So a lot to look forward to here this week. Big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every single day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Wherever you like to listen to podcasts, you can find Locked On Wolves. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. A reminder, if you haven't already signed up, you can check out the Everydayer Club. It's built just for everydayers. Get Locked On Wolves ad-free plus members-only Discord access and more. Head to lockedonwolves.supercast.com to join the club. If you're watching right now on YouTube, we'll send you to the first ever 24/7 National NBA YouTube channel after this episode concludes. On audio, make sure that you make your second listen to the NBA Game Night show over at Locked On NBA. Of course, this show is also part of the very same Locked On Podcast Network, your local experts on all the biggest stories. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.